Well, I will thank you very much for the kind introduction. Very nice to be here, Oliver, together with all the other speakers and also the participants. I see some familiar faces as well, so very nice. Yeah, you raised there a question about the name of Prodigo. Well, when Joanne and me have set up our company, I have to admit that one of the most difficult things of setting up a company was to find a good name for our company. Maybe it's like finding a good name for your baby. And finally, we ended up with choosing a Latin name. And in fact, we took there as an example Switzerland. The name CH, Confederatio Helvetica, as you may know, is also in Latin. So we ended up with Prodigo, which actually is the first person singular from the verb prodigere. And prodigo means I move on, I move forward. So I will also do that now. I understood that I am the last speaker of this morning. So without further ado, I suggest that we have a look at the various topics that I would like to address together with you this morning. Well, I would suggest to begin with how to get started and to sell in the various industries. Then we can zoom in at where to start, a question that we often receive. Then we can, I will talk about the identification of some appropriate sales channels, followed by how to find potential customers. And then the next topic is, to my opinion, maybe one of the most difficult and at the same time most crucial ones, how to get noticed in that sea of other people who are showing up, and then also how to get feedback in sales, very important as well. We will also raise the question if it is worthwhile to work with an agent in Switzerland, and then to end the presentation, we can also have a look and maybe also share some thoughts on who could help you with that in that sales process. Now, it has been mentioned before already by some speakers. You know that contrary to Slovenia, Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, and that clearly affects the doing business. Also at the very start, and I would even say at in the preliminary phase even. And that is also the reason why I very much stress on the fact that when people think of coming to Switzerland, well, they have to do their homework first. And the better they do the homework, well, the more successful they will be afterwards. I often compare a little bit that exercise with the fact when you are, for example, painting at home. When you are painting your walls, well, the result does not really depend maybe on the very last phase when you're really putting the paint on the walls, but for the preliminary work, that you have cleaned the walls, that you have degreased them, that they are really flat and so on. So that determines the end result. And it's a little bit the same when you're preparing to your exports to Switzerland. Well, and it's a little bit parallel to what Joanna's already said, so I will try not to repeat too much information. But when you look at the export barriers, well, then we can make a distinction between the fact if you are offering goods, products, or services. That's already a big distinction. For goods, there are some tariff-free and non-tariff-free barriers may apply on your product. I will show you the example of the trade assistant in a while. Joanna already showed the quite similar procedure with the Swiss TARIS database. It has been mentioned before also by Joanne on checking. It's very important. If you do need an EORI number, so the Economic Operator Registration and Identification Number, which in most cases will apply because that will be needed to complete the customs clearance within the European Union. So that means that before the goods will leave the territory of the European Union, in your case in Slovenia, well, that needs to be done through an AORI number. And as long as that you don't have the AORI number, well, then the goods may remain blocked at the customs. So I would like to stress on that. Well, here you see the screenshot of I took the same example, just in a little bit to think a little bit in the same logics as Joanna's has taken with X for consumption. You see there the HS code, so the harmonized system code. In this case, it has an 8-digit number, and you see that also clearly the stepped system below the yellow banner. So it starts with 2 and then goes to further to 4, 6, and then 8 digits. And the more digits a description has, the more detailed it is. And that can, of course, sometimes help very well to determine which tariff may apply. And in this case, you see here that they may apply 2 types of tariffs. So Slovenia being an EU member state, the EU preferential rate will for sure apply. But then depending on the period in the year, you have to check whether Swiss quotas will apply or not. So in the normal case, then you will have to pay 50 Swiss francs for 100 gross kilograms of eggs. But if there are quota applying at the moment that you are exporting, well, then it is 3 francs less, or 3 euros less per 100 gross kilogram. These quota are in fact so applying within a certain amount of time within the year. And then also on a fixed quantity of goods. So as soon as the quantity that is being fixed in the quota has been reached, well, then the quota may not apply anymore, and then you will have to go again to the preferential rate. So that's something that you need to take into consideration when you are providing products. Now, when providing services, of course, there you have a whole different story, because when you are crossing the border, the Swiss border, well, there is no customs declaration that is being made, because the services are not really tangible. So there, in most cases, you need to appoint a fiscal representative for these VAT purposes. And I say in most cases because there the criterion that is normally applying is that it depends on the height of your turnover, your worldwide turnover, not just the turnover in Switzerland, but worldwide. So also in the domestic and in the foreign markets, all brought together. And when that is more than 100,000 Swiss francs, so currently 100,000 euros, well, then the appointment of a fiscal representative may be needed. And there the task of the fiscal representative is that he will make a declaration towards the Swiss tax administration on a quarterly basis of the turnover that is then has been realized during that quarter. And then, yeah, just to be complete, Joanna's already explained on that more in detail. When you are realizing a project in Switzerland, when you are posting workers there, the specific rules may apply. The reason why I repeated it here is that it's realizing a project in Switzerland can both include the provision of services, but also, of course, the export of goods that are done may be included in the project. For example, it's very often seen that within a construction project, the foreign company is then bringing in also building materials, which are then included in the project, and they are here to stay. So that is also seen as a sale of sales of products. Now, when we zoom in on more specific sectors, so up till now it is more in the general way, so that you have to that you can check that through the various sources that are at your disposal. Now, zooming in on some sectors, of course, it's just a selection because that will bring us too far within the scope of this session. But in general, I would say that depending on the sector where you are active in, there are quite big differences between the types of regulations that apply, also the degree of openness. And that's something, of course, that you cannot not really check in a database, but that is crucial as well. And it's very good to know that in advance, if you are dealing with a sector which is quite open to foreign cooperation or which is protecting itself. The potential, of course, has also been mentioned before in Oliver's presentation. So some big differences may apply. Now, when we look at pharma, for example, of course, a very big industry in Switzerland, and also when looking at trade statistics between Slovenia and Switzerland, is a very important sector. Well, there you may already know that some drugs need to be pre-approved by the Swiss competent authority, which is called Swissmedic. On their website, they have a very clear overview that they provide on the various steps that you should take into consideration for the approval procedure. When you are offering medical devices, well, there some specific rules may apply, because then you will need to appoint a so-called CH rep, or a representative on the Swiss market. Only through that Swiss representative, these products can then afterwards be sold. But that is a preliminary step that also needs to take into account. Before I was mentioning the topic of the openness of a sector, well, to be quite open with you, we feel that, and that's I've also seen that in my previous job as a trade counselor, that the pharma sector is not the most open sector to deal with. So also getting hold of a specific name of a person, of a contact person, or of a prospect within a company is not always so easy. A little bit the same counts also for the banking sector. Does it still have to do with the bank secret? I don't know, but this is also a fact that we have been noticing. When you are offering agricultural products, well, there we have seen it also in the examples that some quotas, tariffs may apply on some products. That has all to do with protectionism of the Swiss agricultural sector. Switzerland is allowed to do that because it's not a member of the European Union. If it were a EU member state, well, that would not have been possible, of course, that is clear. But these rules can apply. And then since more and more organic products are being consumed in Switzerland, I think that Switzerland is even in the top 3 of the highest consumption of organic products. Well, Swiss retailers or distributors may also require specific organic labels. So I think that's also something that need to be checked in advance. What I also would like to mention is that sometimes the requirements may vary from one retailer to another. The 2 big retailers in Switzerland, maybe you've heard already their names, Migros and Coop. Well, they have different requirements on organic labels for the same products. So that's also something that needs to be checked. The best way is to do that in advance, because then when you know that already and you take into consideration this point, well, then you give, of course, a much better prepared impression. Sorry. And then to enter this, to finalize this first topic with the last slide, I think it's also important that you, via several sources, and also Oliver has already abundantly explained or given some links to the sources that you can use for it. But I think it's very important to identify the real potential for your product. So does the sector that you're active in, or even better, the subsector, have clear needs in Switzerland? And when you know that, take that with you in your communication, both orally and also in written, when you're approaching the company. Also there, you will give a much better prepared impression when you are contacting them like that. Now, a question that we very often receive from our customers sorry, is where should we start in Switzerland? As you know, it has also been explained already. Switzerland is has a big variety, even if the country is quite small. So sometimes people are a little bit puzzled by where to start. I think that you can deal with these questions in two ways. For some companies, for them, the most crucial point is to know where the clusters are, where they are active in. And here we prepared a map for you of Switzerland with some key sectors like life sciences and fintech, medtech, mechanics and electronics, clean tech, and also the machine industry. I won't enter too much into detail, but maybe just to go through a few of them, we can say, for example, that life sciences are really concentrated in Basel and its region, and also in and around Zurich, for example. Fintech, you can find that in the canton of Zug, also in Zurich. Medtech is quite present in the whole region around Geneva Lake, also where Lausanne is located. Mechanics and electronics are more spread around Switzerland. You can find them in the western part of Switzerland, for example, in the region of Neuchâtel, but also in the middle of Switzerland, in and around Lucerne, and then also in the south of Switzerland, in the Italian-speaking canton of Ticino. Clean tech can then be found in the cantons of Vaud, where Lausanne, of which Lausanne the capital is, and then also in the southern canton of Wallis, or Valais in French. And then the machine industry is also quite widely spread around Switzerland, ranging from the canton of Aargau, also in the canton of Zurich. You can find a big concentration of machine producers, and then further east to the canton of St. Gallen. That is one approach, so looking at clusters. For other companies, their main concern or main focal point is to look at where the most people are living, because also here on that demographic atlas, you clearly see that the areas in Switzerland where most people live are quite concentrated, and maybe even very concentrated, because out of the 26 cantons in Switzerland, not less than 63% of the entire Swiss population is living just in 7 cantons, which is called the plateau. And that's if you want to, kind of diagonal line that you see on the map, starting here around the Zurich area, and then passing by Basel in the north, and then here going via Bern, and then further southwestwards via Lausanne, and then till the very west of Switzerland in Geneva. And that can, of course, help you by when you're making a selection. I will come back on that later on. when you are preparing your business approach. So taking into account major cities where many companies are located in your type of business, well, could also be a very useful way to move on. Now, how to identify appropriate sales channels? That's the next question I would like to raise with you. And there are various possibilities. Of course, you can work through an importer, through distributors. Is it also worthwhile to work with an agent? I'll come back on that in chapter 6. Where to find the right channels? It has also been mentioned before already. I think that participation in some sector-related events, visiting a trade fair, can of course really help you to get a good idea of the players. You can also talk to exhibitors on the fair. So that does not mean that you should immediately participate with your own stand in a fair, but coming as a visitor, that can also be very useful. And by the way, I have also noticed it very regularly that when visiting a fair, exhibitors often put a kind of plate on their stand that they are, for example, still looking for a distributor. So that can also sometimes help to establish a contact. Participating in networks events, that goes without saying, that can also help there. And then by contacting either trade promotion organizations like Spirit Slovenia, the Embassy, Chamber of Commerce, like the Swiss Chamber for Eastern and Central Europe, or business development companies. Now, when identifying appropriate sales channels, I think it is really crucial to define the right sales profile. So there I come back on what I was saying before, to use some criteria to make a very good selection. The better you do that selection exercise, the more efficient the list will be that you can then use to start your prospection in Switzerland. So I've been mentioning already the geographic location in Switzerland. Of course, linguistic coverage could also play a role there when you say we would rather like to start in the German-speaking part, and then maybe at the second stage in the French-speaking or the Italian-speaking part. But also taking into account some company elements like the size of the company that you're focusing at, and also the number of employees. Turnover is a bit more difficult, and I don't know if that's also really as relevant as a criterion to take that into account. But in general, I would say that try to think about some criteria so that the list is not too long, and sometimes better start with a shorter list that you can then always extend afterwards if it has not really met your expectations. Another point that, of course, can help you as well is that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. When you already have a very successful sales profile elsewhere, well, take that as a basis. And the definition of the sales profile, Oliver has also mentioned it before, the three C's can really help there. So then you can maybe try to use that as a basis that you can maybe then further elaborate for the Swiss market. But I think that could really be a good basis. And then I would like to end this topic by a remark, and that is something that I have noticed over and over again, that we sometimes receive complaints from foreign companies that their sales representative, whether it be a wholesaler or distributor or an agent, is not really fully meeting their expectations. And in many cases, that is often due to the fact that the representative is only or mainly focusing on the area where he or she is based. So for example, when he's based in the German-speaking part, well, that this person is rarely coming to the French-speaking part of Switzerland. And that is, of course, a pity, because then you have some missed opportunities. You are paying that person maybe not to get a full return on investment. So that is something that that you should be attentive at. There, as a solution, there are maybe two solutions then. Either you appoint a separate sales rep for each region, let's say each, because I think that the two main regions, the German-speaking and the French-speaking, they are the biggest ones in Switzerland, that will suffice. Or another possibility could be, maybe it's a little bit more time-consuming to find the good one, but is to focus on bilingual cantons. There are also some bilingual cantons in Switzerland, like Bern or Fribourg, and also Valais or Wallis canton. So there you can then appoint one person who is then also well-versed in both languages. And that, of course, could also be a solution to cope with that problem. Now, the next topic is how to find the potential customers. There are various channels. There are the classic online sales platforms. You can also go through the, as I said before, trade promotion organizations, chambers of commerce, or also through private partners, business development companies, visiting the fairs, participating in matchmaking events, for example, within the framework of a trade mission. It could also be interesting. And also through public procurement. I understood that there was also a question from one of the participants here, but I think it's worthwhile to extend a little bit on this topic. So basically, there are three levels on which the public procurement in Switzerland is taking place: at the federal level for the entire country, then at the cantonal level, so that means for at the individual level of one of the 26 cantons. And then the third level is at the municipal level. And there are, in Switzerland, there are currently 2,148 municipalities. Here you see the screenshot of the platform cmap.ch, where you can find most of the tenders which are being published by these three levels: federal, cantonal, and municipal level. Here in the left column that you can, here for example, you see the selection by the canton, so that you also can zoom in there. Now, in general, tenders are applicable for construction projects as of a value of 300,000 euros. And for products and services, there it is, the threshold is 150,000 euros. I see a double advantage on following up on public procurement. First of all, and that is maybe from a market prospection point of view, that they allow you to get a good idea on the precise needs by the public organizations in Switzerland, public authorities, for specific products or services, or often also a combination of both. So the CMAP platform allows you to get a subscription based on a number of selection criteria. So when you have made a good selection there, well, then you will receive on a regular basis by email new tenders which are coming up. And when looking at them, well, then you can also get, yeah, I think a quite precise idea on what is needed. But as I said, only by public players, of course. And then, of course, when you think that you are eligible to join, then of course, then you can participate in the tender. There are two types of procedures, the open and the selective procedure. The open being a public call for tenders, a classic procedure whereby any tenderer may then submit a tender. The tender is only valid when at least 3 bidders have announced. And the time limit to submit a tender is 40 days. And then you have a variety on the first type. That's the selective procedure, whereby interest tenderers first submit a request to take part. And then you need to be selected. At least also 3 bidders should be selected in order to be, or in order to have a valid tender process. And then the awarding body may then submit the tender in its entirety. And there the submission is the same as the same time limit as in the open procedure, 40 days. And to just to express your mark of interest, well, there you have 25 days to submit that type of application. There is a limit, of course, as I said before, that you only can participate in public sales, let's say. But there is another limit as well, because by definition, tenders are focusing on a number of sectors. I think it's quite logical that you see many tenders appearing in health, construction, engineering, and energy sectors, and that of course the food sector is not really present here. So that also is something that you have to take into account when looking at these tenders. Now, according to my opinion, one of the most crucial and at the same time most difficult stage in the whole sales process is how to get noticed, because of course you're not really alone. And it makes me even more difficult maybe in Switzerland, because Switzerland is a market which is very mature, with a high degree of saturation. So you're not the only one who is coming there. And that's also what we often hear when we are approaching Swiss customers for our clients. So that they have received many requests already. So what I would mention and put it there clearly as a basic rule, you only get one chance to give a first good impression. So be prepared as good as you can. So I would like to share with you some tips how the best you can prepare yourself. Basic line here is to lower the threshold for your Swiss prospect as much as you can. So make it as easy for him or for her as you can. And one of the ways to do that is by translating the documentation, can be a brochure or a flyer or also your website, into German or French, because it has clearly been proven already that the Swiss prospect will, that the chances that your Swiss prospect will read that are much higher, because then you're really addressing yourself in his or her mother tongue. Another tip is that try to focus in your product or services range. Do not offer the whole range, because for sure, when you have a very big portfolio of products, for example, well, certain products may be more interesting for the Swiss market than others. So I think also it's better to use the device of less is more. So that can really help as well. Another tip is that you should try to identify what the real needs of the prospect, of the Swiss potential customer are, and address that to him or to her, by also incorporating that in your communication. That makes it also more appealing and much more concrete. And when you have good references in the sector of the prospect, well, try to mention that as well. That can either be a reference of a Swiss company that you're already dealing with on other markets, or another company that is also well known in Switzerland. Another point that you can highlight is when you are an SME. So if you are a small or medium-sized enterprise, well, I think that you have then also a real advantage, because then you can talk from equal to your Swiss counterpart. And why do I say that? Because in Switzerland, you see the number there, 99.7% of all the Swiss companies have an SME status. And they count for 3/3 of all the Swiss jobs, by the way. So it's really a very important part of the economy. We have noticed that it can really help when you are mentioning that in building up the trust, and then also, from there, use it as a basis for a long-term partnership. If on top of that, you are not only an SME, but also a family-owned company, and you see that a Swiss company is also family-owned, which they, in case they often are so proud to mention it on their website. So it's not very difficult to know that. So that's another element that you can mention when you are approaching them. And then the cultural differences are something that should not be neglected neither. There are 4 languages in Switzerland, but the 4th is Romansh or Rheto-Romanisch, which is spoken only by a very tiny part of the population. But the other languages are German, French, and Italian. And you really see also that the way of doing business in Ticino, for example, in the Italian part of Switzerland, is quite different compared, for example, to the German-speaking part, where it is much more Germanic, let's say. The French is a little bit in between, but of course, it's also more in the Latin way to do business. So that's one thing that you should take into account. The other thing is that when you are active in a sector like the gastronomy, or in fashion, or in decoration, well, the tastes there may also be different. And I think it's also quite logical, but that is also something that you can take into account when you are putting together some criteria on where to put your focus on in Switzerland. And then, of course, literature, that goes without saying, that because it's directly related to the language. But that may apply less maybe in the case of a Slovenian company. Now, another element that can really help, and that you should give thought for reflection, is that you do well in determining in advance at which level you want to approach the potential client. Are you going by bottom up, from the bottom up, or is it rather a bottom down approach that you would like to follow? I personally think that the bottom up approach is more suited for bigger companies, because there the people at the C level, at the management level, are much more difficult to reach. They are, of course, much more busy with many activities. And of course, they are also approached quite often. So it's difficult to get noticed. So I refer to what I was mentioning previously. So I think that the bottom up, maybe by focusing on a specialist in your field of activities or the products that you're offering, is better there. Whereas for contacting a smaller or medium-sized enterprise, the bottom-down approach can be more efficient. because there the management is also more easily approachable. Well, when you don't have a specific name of your contact person, well, then you can try to call the company, and then by asking who is in charge. If you're lucky enough to be put through that person and the person is available, well, I think you can very briefly introduce yourself as a start and then gauge his interest and needs. You will quite quickly feel if the person is showing a first sign of interest. And if he does, well, I think then you can propose to send immediately afterwards a follow-up email with some documentation, whereby I also recommend not to just send that documentation, but also to ask how you will do the follow-up. When you clearly suggest a follow-up approach, well, then the person will also react on that, and then you can see from there. When it's not possible to talk to the person, well, then at least you can try to ask his personal email address, if it's possible. As I said, in the pharma sector, it is very difficult to obtain a personal email address just by calling the general number of the company. Because, yeah, when just sending it to info@ addresses, well, they rarely generate a reaction. But if you have the personal email address, well, then you can then do the communication in written, and then you can also ask a feedback. Now, before I was raising the topic of working with an agent. Is that the right approach? Well, in Switzerland, there is no obligation to work with an agent. You can, but it's not mandatory, of course. It has some advantages to work with an agent because he has a direct access to potential clients. He is familiar with the Swiss business culture. It remains to be seen if it's for the entire territory of Switzerland, as I was saying before, or not. And also in case of need, he can also offer after-sales services. Now, what I have to mention here or remark here is that there is much less tendency in Switzerland for the last 10, 15 years to work with an agent, because due to the simple fact that there are fewer agents in the market. For agents, it is often not so interesting anymore to do the job, because the margins have become smaller and smaller. That is due to mainly due to competition competition reasons. So what I would then rather recommend is to search for an importer or directly work with a distributor. And as I said before, you can then try to find one for the whole of Switzerland or one in each of the main language regions, being German and French. Now, finally, let's tackle the question on where to seek help. First, there are, of course, the public organizations like trade promotion organizations. I think that you have a very good help from Spirit Slovenia, also from the embassy with Jascha. And of course, also through the Chamber of Commerce. Oliver has also pointed out the range of services that his chamber is offering. So that can be useful. But besides that, of course, there are also private companies, for example, like ours, specialized in business development. And I personally see that both types of players have a complementary role. For the first one, I think that they are more focusing on the organization of business-related events. For example, by organizing trade missions or information seminars, by setting up networking events, and also by providing the first row or the first level of information. And I think then the private companies are then coming on the foreground when at the moment when the market entry questions are becoming more and more concrete, and that maybe some more time and energy is being needed to really tackle all these questions. So I really see there a complementary role. In the same line as Joanne has also done, and Oliver as well, here you see also a slide with some on the players that I have been mentioning throughout my presentation. And as I understood, these slides will also be shared with all of you afterwards. So then you can also have a look at these websites when you think it's useful for you. And well, this concludes my presentation. Both for the presentation of Joanne and mine, I would suggest that we can then, we are now available to answer your questions for all of those that you have for both Joanne's and also my presentation. Thank you very much.